Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for registering for today's webinar, Opportunities for Financial Service Providers in an Evolving AML Fintech Environment. My name is Mike O'Hurl, and I am a member of the ACY Executive. Just a couple of points before we begin. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available soon after the session has concluded. If you would like to pose a question to our speakers, please do so through the question section on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll now hand over to our moderator and Director of PAT Fintech, Andrew Quinn.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you again to the ACOI for hosting the event today. I'm going to introduce Jennifer in a moment, and later on, obviously, I'll introduce Cormac, and I want to thank them for taking the time to do this as well today. I think it's going to be really interesting. What we're going to try and do is look at opportunities for compliance professionals and maybe focus a little bit particularly around anti-money laundering, which is a very, very, very topical area. And obviously Cormac can speak to some of the so-called crypto issues related to anti-money laundering a little later. And in between, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the new diploma, which will be commencing end of September. Just give you a little overview of the program and its origin and obviously what we're trying to achieve. So, Michael, if you want to roll on a slide, I might just introduce Jennifer. Jennifer from Savvy Recruitment. Thank you very much for taking the time, Jennifer. And I might just let you pick it up from there and we'll see how this goes for the next 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much, Andrew. And delighted to be here and thanks for the opportunity. So as Andrew said, my name is Jennifer Cahill. I co-founded Savvy Recruitment Consultants with my business partner, Trace Cadell, in 2017. So we specialise pretty much entirely in recruiting for financial services firms, and fintech as a blend between technology and financial services is then hugely within the radar of what we cover and recruit for. And, you know, in the last couple of years, more and more, we have seen the fintech sector, and I know it's a pretty broad definition and has myriad interpretations of it, but essentially how I would look at it is either traditional financial services like banks and insurance companies embracing technology and doing things slicker and more efficiently, and obviously payments is a massive part of the fintech industry and probably what people would associate most prominently with fintech. But we're seeing technology firms such as Google and Facebook start up financial services divisions, payment divisions, looking at banking licenses. So it's really an interesting time for fintech in terms of an industry in Ireland. So I might just flick on to the next slide there. I've sort of touched on a couple of things there in terms of Ireland. It is a really strong hub globally for new startups within the fintech industry, and we've kind of RegTech and all these technologies around trying to make regulation and complying with regulation much more efficient for regulated firms. And then obviously it's a very popular branch location for a lot of international companies, again payments companies being a big part of that. And obviously we've Stripe that have set up their Irish base here and have been actively recruiting, the same as for Revolut. So some big names, along with a lot of maybe names that would fly under the radar that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know, but it is a really active space. With that comes regulatory scrutiny, and the CBI, obviously, as our regulator here in Ireland, is very active in this space in terms of particularly substance and making sure that firms in this sort of fintech industry don't kind of think that, okay, because you've got technology and that makes things very slick and efficient, it doesn't mean that you can scrimp back in any way in terms of substance around risk and compliance and the type of resources in terms of people that you need to staff up your business with here in Ireland in order to get licensed in the first place, but also to maintain your license here if you want to operate out of Ireland and access the European market. So it's coming, and we've seen that from a recruitment perspective, where maybe a firm comes in and they have their own idea or maybe their fixed budget around what they want to spend on a compliance or risk professional. And the CBI are very strongly going, no, that's irrespective of what you want to spend, this is the caliber of what we expect you to hire and what we believe will give you good rigor internally in terms of compliance and risk management. So there is a little bit of tension sometimes around that, but certainly any fintech that's seeking regulation here in Ireland and anywhere in Europe is going to feel that kind of intensity from the regulators. And in AML breaches then in particular, we've seen with a lot of the big global investment banks, there have been some significant fines for AML breaches. in what would have traditionally been perceived maybe as the poorer cousin of the broader end of compliance. That AML was a very functional thing, it just happened, and that's where oversight and lack of oversight, I would say, started to slip in relation to AML, and obviously hence they're all being fined. But it now makes it a big focus now. Everybody's very aware that all regulators are all over AML, and for lots of other reasons it's really, really important. So it is an area where every regulated firm needs to be incredibly conscious of and very much aware, and have really, really good staff in-house that are managing AML compliance. So if we flick on, Michael, just to the next slide there, a lot of what we see in the Irish market, and I think this is definitely replicated across all European markets, is that across traditional banking, like our retail banking sector, if you look at that, for example, it's downsizing. They're under pressure in terms of cost. They're trying to compete with the fintechs like the Revoluts, for example, in the banking sector. And the likes of an AIB or Bank of Ireland, they simply have too much cost to compete effectively. So what they're trying to do, as we've seen, is kind of reduce their branch network to make it more efficient from a cost perspective, and trying to embrace as much technology as they can in order to compete. So it is a sector, in terms of that traditional sector, that's under pressure, and with that then comes a lot of redundancies, as we've seen in the last couple of years. And people are looking to the fintech sector. They're going, okay, I have all this experience in financial services, maybe a traditional bank or an insurance company. How do I take that experience and apply it into what to me looks like a really good growth industry here in Ireland? And they're right. You know what I mean? It is, I would say to people, always look for where there's growth, because where there's growth, there's opportunity. And particularly right now, if you get in at this stage with a lot of startups, for example, there is opportunity to do really, really well, and maybe get into a role and have different roles, that you maybe in a traditional bank or insurance company you would never have had the opportunity to have before. And as it's a key requirement for risk and compliance, then you're going to be guaranteed that there's opportunity for risk and compliance professionals within those fintech firms. So in terms of the most common thing that we get asked here is around, how do you transition? How do you take yourself from maybe a compliance role or an AML role in a traditional bank or an insurance company, or maybe it's a credit union or whatever it might be, and sort of make yourself an attractive prospect to a fintech in Ireland. The first thing is upskilling. So a course like what Andrew's going to bring you through now, that will be on offer later this year, is certainly a really, really good place to start. When people are interviewing for roles, instead of just having a kind of a very high level understanding of the realities of what a role, for example, like an AML manager in a fintech would look like, or a head of compliance, it's always best to be able to point to really relevant practical examples. And if you haven't worked in that area, then to say, look, in terms of studying your course, what you've covered, and I know Andrew will run through this, but the course is very practical in terms of its application, in terms of case studies, and bringing in fintechs as part of that course to talk you through the realities of what it's like to manage compliance and risk within a fintech today. So I think that is hugely relevant. It also shows intention, that you're not just interviewing at will, that this is something in terms of a career that you're really dedicated and that you want to do. And employers do look really favorably on people who back themselves to do these courses and to upskill. So I think on 2 scores, it's a really good thing to do. Networking, again, you can never underestimate the benefit of this, and particularly in an Irish market, which is relatively small. There's a lot of people who've already transitioned from traditional banking over to fintechs and have, probably leading out these businesses. So again, if you know them, if you know of them, if there's events that they're attending, if you can get yourself into those networks, if you can see those kind of groups that are meeting and talking about things that are very topical for the fintech industry, that's certainly something you should be very proactive in doing. And LinkedIn is a great resource to be able to access these groups, or just find out what's happening, or what events, like Eventbrite, just keeping an eye on things like that. Research is another thing. You can't over research something that you're interested in, or a company that you're going to interview for. And again, trying to find people that you might know who maybe know something practically about working for them, or know somebody that you can speak to, or even in a comparable firm where you can just get an insight into what it's really like, so that when you're interviewing, you're talking very, very pointedly around what the issues to be, which again, from an employer perspective, gives them huge comfort that you're interviewing for a role in which you have good insight. You know what I mean? You have some very practical understanding about what it would be like day to day to work in the role. And then persistence, again, it's a very competitive market right now. It's a bit crazy, to be honest with you. So persistence is key, definitely in this kind of market. And although compliance and risk skill sets are in demand, the number of opportunities that are out there versus the number of candidates makes it really, really competitive. So I would say to people, look, stick with it. Don't lose faith. If you're in a process, you get to the last two. I deal with a lot of people at the moment who are getting down to the last two for a number of processes, and it's maybe 3 or 4 times they have to go at it to secure kind of the right role for them. But it does happen, and don't kind of take it personally. It is just a factor of the market at the moment, and how competitive, and particularly for fintech roles, they are what people want to get into, across the board for all disciplines, not just risk and compliance, but particularly for risk and compliance, people see that the opportunity is there. So they're kind of what I would advise people to do. But certainly this course and the practicalities of it, I think, are hugely relevant and will be very beneficial to anybody looking to make that transition. So that's me, Andrew.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hang on, let's wait for my camera to come back on. Do you mind me might just tease out a couple of things?
Yeah.
You know, recently, Paul Smith from Top Tier did one of these webinars with me, and myself and Paul had done written an article for the ICQ magazine. And I think the way we looked at it is that there's kind of like a tactical and a strategic shift going on here. And I just, you know, to begin with the tactical, Brexit in and of itself, creating opportunities. Are we seeing different types of roles coming into, obviously, Ireland for obvious reasons? But that obviously creates a spillover effect, which I think is perhaps a medium-term, long-term benefit.
Yeah, no, certainly, because I think, look, if you're a company and you're looking at a European jurisdiction that you want to set up in, and because of Brexit, Ireland now has more in broader financial services, you know, across the entire ecosystem, and particularly in investment management and front office, which we never really had in any real substance before Brexit. And payments, and again, what we've had, you know, like the Western Unions and the bigger payment place, you know, PayPal's here in Ireland. So certainly you just need some of those early big names to pick Ireland, and now you've Stripe on the payments industry picking here, to create this kind of ecosystem where people are going, that's where we need to be. We need to be in Ireland in order to be at the forefront of what we want to do within our particular industry, you know, wherever it might be in financial services. So there is that compounding effect of, you know, just a couple of the first movers, and then that creates a kind of a wave of others kind of following suit.
Yeah, and that's a good word, actually, compounding. And I think, again, I love the word ecosystem. I use it probably too much, but it is creating that ecosystem. And I think, obviously, yourself to some degree, myself, I'd like to think so. Our role is to try and kind of create and nurture the talent that I think the ecosystem needs to sort of flourish and grow. And just go back to what I said earlier, I also think that there's a strategic shift going on. I think that it is related to the technological side of things, but I think the compliance function is more and more starting to be perceived as very strategic, not just, you used the word functional earlier on, and it's a good word. And I think there is a transition, and I'll come back to transition and other things as well. But just again, different types of roles and opportunities being created because of a strategic shift in how compliance is now seen as essential. And it's essential to all the risk-based decision making that companies need to make, maybe particularly fintechs, but not just fintechs. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, yeah, there was a stage where we went through where compliance was, look, okay, it's a cost. I just want to tick the box on this, and I kind of want to go in with, you know, the lowest level I can kind of get away with to get regulated. And that has definitely, any firms that are still trying to peddle that, they're not going to have any success. So it's very much, the marker has been established that you know, compliance and risk, as you said, needs to be an embedded part of your organizational structure and management. It's not a function that sits aside from your COO or your CEO. It's very, and it comes down to investment as well. Like, you know, people are scaling businesses in some cases to sell those businesses and to have value. And there's absolutely no way you're going to sell your regulated business if you have gaping holes in your regulatory management, and you have things pending with your local regulator in terms of breaches or anything like that. So I think firms more and more are seeing that you need to be very pragmatic in relation to compliance and risk, that, you know, to embrace it, to be very, very good at it, and have a really good relationship with your local regulator is a huge competitive advantage, and ironically can save you a huge amount of administrative load internally, because you're being a good player. You know, you're acting in good faith, you're doing what you need to do. The central bank in our case can see that compliance and risk is very much embedded into your business, and that you embrace it and that you see the value of it. And those businesses tend to get left alone. You know what I mean? They get the cursory reviews, but you know, if you do that and you set up right, and I think that's what a lot of businesses have seen that have entered the Irish market, if you embrace it and you do it right and you set the tone right from the very beginning with the Central Bank of Ireland, and you're not going in going, oh, I only want to spend X amount on my compliance and risk person, then you've set the wrong tone there straight away from the beginning, and they're already going to be really skeptical of you in terms of who you hire to do those, and they're going to be crawling all over you. So there is a tone, there is a way to do it, and as you said, just be very strategic and demonstrate how you are embracing it, because that will make your life as a regulated firm an awful lot easier in the long run.
No, I totally agree, and I think again, this is born of many conversations with many people, but to some degree, and again, just come back to what you said about fintech, it is a very nebulous term. It means a lot of different things, but it's really just financial services meets technological innovation or change, whatever you want to call it. But some things are a constant. Trust and reputation are a constant in financial services.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's more recognition, and maybe this is a positive side effect from the fintech type of evolution, that there's a realization that you have to, as you say, have that trust and reputation, not just with the regulator, but with consumers.
Yeah.
For the company to, you know, to flourish again, to be profitable, to expand. And as you say, a lot of them are looking at exits and stuff like that. So I just think it is a really exciting time. There's kind of like, I think, a confluence of factors that are changing the perception of what compliance and risk is about. And I think AML, I'll just finish up with a question about AML, if you don't mind, Jennifer. AML, clearly, there's been a lot going on, even in the last few months, we now have a bit more clarity about what the new authority is going to look like. We have a lot more clarity about AML Directive 5 now being transposed into law, and Cormac might talk about the impact of that a little bit later. But I just again feel that AML again is benefiting from a very, very, I think, healthy ecosystem we have around RegTech. And there's a lot of providers, I think, doing really interesting, creative things to improve how we look at everything. And I won't talk too much about the program yet, from that initial risk assessment all the way through to how we can provide more effective, sorry about the dog, more effective suspicious transaction reporting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if just AML as a pocket, just a couple of words around the opportunity.
Yeah. So certainly, because AML would have, as I said, kind of been the poor relation. It would have been you know, it would have been seen as a very functional part of the overall compliance management, you know, and maybe somebody more junior would have focused on the day-to-day running of AML, because it was deemed very admin heavy, you know what I mean, a lot of, and depending on the business, but that would have been the perception. And then you maybe had a broader compliance person overseeing it. But over time, as AML became, no, that's a specialism, you know what I mean? You need people, you started to get more senior people specializing in AML and being like AML managers or head of AML, and that kind of evolved probably over the last sort of 5-8 years, kind of going back, that you start to see, oh, okay, there was value in being an AML specialist, and this was becoming increasingly important. So, and again, as you said, the technology enables you to not have to spend so much time on the admin heavy stuff, and to make that, you know, still doing everything you need to do, but making it slicker so that you can really focus on the kind of substantial parts of anti-money laundering in terms of your policies and things you need to be looking out for in terms of, you know, obviously technological change that's maybe making it easier for people to slip through nets, and those really kind of chunky parts of the role that for more senior people in compliance and those compliance experts, that's what they want to be spending their time doing, rather than the more procedural stuff, and where technology can help to do that in a more slicker and efficient way, and to onboard new clients, you know, again, probably in a much more robust way, you know, because there's always human error. Then I think all of that is welcome, and it just allows that compliance officer to focus, as I said, more on those procedural policy, like looking at upstream regulation, what's coming, where are the risks around AML, and being able to preempt those, as opposed to just getting bogged down in the day-to-day reporting.
Again, totally agree, and I think there's a lot of tailwinds behind, if you like, the evolution of the AML compliance role. And I think it is definitely becoming more strategic and more predictive and trying to be smarter, because the truth is, and it's partly obviously the reason behind the EU's actions, we haven't been particularly good at AML. I mean, if you look at the numbers, they're quite depressing, actually. How the lack of effective prevention of money laundering and terrorist financing and other things. But I think there's tailwinds creating a really, really interesting environment for people working in that sort of sector going forward. Yeah. I might just, if you don't mind, Jennifer, I know you're going to stay with us and we'll hopefully do a Q&A at the end. I might just say a few words about the program, if that's okay, and then I'll introduce Cormac. And Cormac will obviously have an interesting perspective given his role with Crypto.com. So I don't know, Michael, would it be okay to just go to the first of my slides? Thank you very much, Michael. I won't take too much of everyone's time on this, but as you can see almost from all the badges, quite proud of the collaboration that went into the development of this program. To begin with, it was very much a partnership with the ACOI and with an expert group that was pulled together from across the industry. And it wasn't just from financial institutions. There were other stakeholders involved in the development of the program, which was written over the course of probably about 6 months. Very obviously pleased to say that IFS SkillNet support the program. There's 30% funding available through the partnership with IFS SkillNet, which obviously, again, I'm very conscious of people's time and money. Hopefully that makes the program a little bit more attractive to people. And also very pleased to say that at PAT, we have a partnership in place with TU Dublin, the new Technological University of Dublin. As some of you probably know, there's a number of these being created across the country, bringing together the old ITs, so to speak. And this is a level 8 diploma. It was validated a few months ago. It's on the framework, and again, very, very proud of all the people who helped me develop this. It starts, as you can see, the last week of September. I think that is the Monday. There's a small possibility it might start on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, but it's definitely starting the last week of September. If you could just roll onto the next slide, Michael. Yeah, thank you, Michael. So just very briefly, and this recording will be shared, and I don't want to dwell on it too much. I think the conversation with Jennifer, we teased out a few things, but I think it's just fair to say that, this is a really interesting time to be working in compliance generally, AML in this case specifically. And I think what makes this program or this course different is it was absolutely written, if you like, by industry for industry. And that's something, again, very committed to that. But I think even more importantly is the final sentence, that one of the things I think makes PAT Fintech different, and I'd obviously like to think we are different, I'd like to think we are better at certain things, is that we have a strong commitment that the course will be delivered by industry practitioners. So as Jennifer kindly mentioned earlier, the course, it is of course scaffolded with the underlying syllabus. There are obviously going to be slides and other materials every week. There'll be readings, there'll be pre-recorded briefings around certain things related to each week's content. But for the large part, the live classes will be delivered through industry practitioners and will focus very heavily. And we had some experience of this in the recent certificate we finished, of which Cormac was a student, and Cormac might say a few words about his experience on the certificate, but very much focused on industry practitioners. So I mean people who are actually doing the type of work we're talking about and are trying to solve the sort of problems that we're talking about, that are trying to innovate and use new solutions to help them solve these problems. All these people will be in the classroom and they will be delivering real life case studies, scenarios. We use a lot of breakout rooms, which if you're not familiar, which I think we probably all are with Zoom these days, we can break the class up into small groups, and the lecturer, myself, and the industry person, whoever it happens to be, we can go in and we can sort of tease out real scenarios and come back together and discuss what various groups may or may not have thought was an appropriate solution to sort of the challenge, the problem. And I just think that creates a really engaging environment. And I think another thing that Jennifer touched upon, which is very important to myself and PAT, is to create networking opportunities for you. So obviously the class itself, there'll probably be people who are either working in compliance, thinking of moving into compliance. Maybe they are currently AML professionals. Maybe they're looking to slightly change the direction of their career. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, you know, there are challenges on a number of sectors in the traditional, if you like, financial services sector. So obviously some people, some of you may be listening to me at the moment, you know, looking at opportunities to maybe reskill, upskill, give yourself an opportunity to maybe take a slightly different direction in your career path. But what's really important is create an environment where you get that opportunity to network and network with the people who are delivering the program. So again, you'll meet lots of very experienced people working in very senior for the main compliance and risk functions, particularly in AML. And look, hopefully that creates some of those networking opportunities that Jennifer touched on earlier. And I can just say from my own experience that those opportunities are very important, you know, and obviously trying to create them is again something the program intends to do. So just on to the next slide, Michael, just a couple of quick words about the program itself. Now, all the information is available on the website. On the website, you can actually download a brochure for the program. There's actually, and with thanks to the ACOI, there's a comprehensive list of the CPD hours, which are very, I would say, generous. There's a very good quotient of CPD hours related to the program itself. The program is what I call double badged. You get the academic, if you like, validation from TU Dublin at level 8. You also get the professional designation. So there will be a designation. We haven't quite come up with the acronym. A lot of you may already be, say, for example, LCOI. It'll be something of that nature, but there will be a professional designation awarded if you choose to accept it from the ACOI on completion of the program. So just real quickly, 2 semesters means 2 academic semesters of 12 weeks. So 12 weeks before Christmas, 12 weeks after Christmas. There are also PDFs of the draft timetables on the website if you want to check that. 4 modules, so 4 different modules, 2, not surprisingly, in semester 1, 2 more in semester 2. 100% online. Now, of course, we may, depending on circumstances which we can't obviously control, look to do maybe some sessions in a classroom environment if that felt appropriate at some point. But at the moment, we're certainly planning to do everything 100% online, and everything is recorded. So, you know, if you can't make a class, there's no great downside. You'll have every opportunity to see everything that we covered, including the recording of the class, the live class. And as I mentioned, very heavily focused on industry or maybe other stakeholders doing the live classes. The modules themselves, real quickly, start at the beginning, I suppose. AML framework, you know, the legislation, the directives. Again, there's a lot more detail around this on the website if you choose to have a look. The AML cycle, the different stages, and obviously all of this is infused very much in a contemporary, data-driven fintech type environment. Fintech environment might just mean the operating model is clearly a little different to a traditional institution. Evolution of AML compliance in the second half, so the first 2 modules, sorry, on the left as I look at the screen are semester 1. The second 2 on the right are semester 2. How AML compliance is evolving, and obviously a lot of this now is going to be tied into the recent EU announcements, the new authority, the 6 pillars, the action plan, how is this going to play out and what does it mean? And finally, innovation and compliance, looking at specifically now the technologies that we can use. So the underlying technologies, you know, that are being utilized to create really interesting RegTech type solutions for the AML problem. So the second semester is probably far more future looking, like how we can actually incorporate technology and techniques to improve our AML compliance. The first half of the program is infused, as I said, with fintech, but is probably setting the foundations for the second half. So I'll just go to the final slide, Michael, and then I'm going to introduce Cormac. Any further information or just contact, want to have a chat, you're not sure about the program, just want to say hello, please contact me. I'm very approachable, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And as I said, the website itself has an awful lot of information, to be honest, about the program. As I said, there's a brochure, there's PDFs, there's details about the different modules. And again, if you've got any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. So I might just leave it there if it's okay, Michael, and I might just hand over to Cormac, give Cormac an opportunity to say a few words about what he does himself. And then, Cormac might be kind enough to mention something about his experience with PAT Fintech. And then, I think we might end up having a little Q&A with Cormac and Jennifer. And if any questions come in through the chat, I'll obviously try to address those. So Cormac, if I can introduce you, sir.
Sure. No, thank you very much, Andrew. That's great. So Cormac Tynan is my name. I'm General Manager for Crypto.com in Ireland. So maybe I'll just give you a little bit of a background to the company, and then look at it from a potentially regulatory side of things as well, and AML. I think probably the context is important. So we are HQ'd in Hong Kong. We've bases now in Japan, Singapore, the US, Canada, UK, and here in Europe, in Malta and Bulgaria, as well as Ireland. And plans to open up other parts of the world as well, so South Africa and UAE are on the roadmap too. And our focus is on accelerating the development, I suppose, the world's transition to cryptocurrency. So you can see, hopefully, from the slide there. If you just want to move on to the next slide, Michael, you'll see there from the slide that we are, our focus is on sort of redefining how money is sort of transitioned and moved, transferred from person to person. Did you lose me there?
Just a second. You're okay, though. You're okay, Cormac. You're okay.
All right, no worries. Yeah, so our focus is on how money, as I said, is moved, how it's I suppose transferred, peer to peer, person to person, and how it's spent, and also obviously how it's invested as well. So we offer a Visa debit card for payments, the ability for merchants to accept crypto in some cases. Then there's the exchange. And you can earn interest, and there's various different types of incentives as well in terms of on the payment side of things, cash back and other incentives such as Netflix and Spotify and other stuff as well. So, Europe is especially important to us, and Ireland specifically as a global firm. We call ourselves a kind of a global startup, which is kind of a little bit odd, I know. I mean, we have 2,000 people, globally at this stage. But very much a lot of the offices are very early phase, and we call ourselves, I say, a global startup as well. So in that fintech sort of scenario, we would still see ourselves as, relatively startup in a lot of cases. We're very young. We only established in 2016, but we decided to build one of our strategic operation centers, for example, in Sofia, because the excellent location there and the ability to serve global locations that Europe offers. From an Ireland standpoint, though, we're building a multifaceted operations here. So you're looking at business and compliance, product operations, development type roles. So we'll have 30, 40 people over the next couple of years. And the reputation that we have in Ireland around the growing pool of tech and fintech talent, around entrepreneurship, and sort of all the hard work that goes into it from firms like the IDA, the Department of Finance globally. That's really growing our reputation as a sector, and both indigenous and I think global fintech and technology firms are attracted as a result to establishing here. There's a great centre in the heart of the Docklands here in Dublin. We talk about Silicon Docks and so on and so forth. I think it's much wider than that, and there's an awful lot of firms in the west of Ireland, the southwest of the country as well. So they're all very important factors to the establishing of the firm here. But at the end of the day, as a financial services firm, we must be regulated, and it's important to us to be regulated. And I might ask Michael to go on to the next slide there. Just as a sort of a background in terms of what I'm saying. So I think, as I say, it's important for us to go on to be regulated, to be compliant, and to be secure. And it's very important to us to be seen as one of the most compliant firms in our industry. You'll see there on the page that we've received a number of different certifications, accreditations, and licenses already, and a number of those would be first in the world, and that's really important to us. The regulatory side of the business is probably to a large extent unseen maybe, but also people may not just be aware of it or consider it to be a significant part of the business, but it really is. Being regulated by the CBI is of utmost importance to us at the end of the day. Our product offerings, we would say, are, for example, what the firm we use, or the expression we use is they're Main Street as opposed to Wall Street. I think that's where we're focused. At the end of the day, we still are a technology firm, but also a financial services firm. So while there may not be any widespread crypto-related specific regulations out there today, but there are, obviously they are in the pipeline, and many people would have heard of MiCA, for example, coming in 2023/2024. We are still subject, would you believe, to a number of other existing regulations just by nature of what we do. So if I give you an example, PSD2 we will be regulated by GDPR, and obviously we talked earlier on about AML and AMLD5. So the European Union's 5th anti-money laundering directive, AMLD5, now extends and takes into scope firms that offer certain services related to virtual assets. So there's quite a prescriptive list, but it pretty much seems to take in anything to do with virtual assets or crypto at all. Anybody undertaking any of those activities must now register with the CBI under the 5th AML directive. So since the 23rd of April, when the regulation was transposed, each of the VASPs, as they call virtual asset service providers, must now register with the CBI from an AML perspective. So it's hugely important to us. And if you think about it, we have, most of our customers, our vast majority of our customers are retail customers. As I said, Main Street as opposed to Wall Street. So from that point of view, AML is of huge priority to us, and obviously to the different regulators under which we're regulated. So we take it with extreme importance. From our perspective, I would say that in Ireland, a significant amount of the team that will be here will be regulatory focused, compliant focused. Goes back to what Andrew and Jennifer were discussing earlier on. I'd imagine I can see a compliance team which will actually have two very distinct roles. One will be on the regulatory compliance side of things, and the other will be on financial crime and AML and so on. I think the role of compliance within firms, whether it be crypto or otherwise, has grown to such a level of complexity and sophistication that you've now got experts in both of those areas, whereas potentially previously someone within a compliance team may have been asked to wear both hats, if you want, or operate in both areas. I think now we're finding that as the teams grow and the complexity grows, we'll probably find now that specialists and specialist teams are required in order to properly manage the business and remain compliant and do the reporting that's needed. So I think taking all of that into account, the regulations that we adhere to, that we report to, the widening of the regulatory net, if you want to call it that, to include vast virtual asset service providers like ourselves and crypto firms, means that our industry needs experts as much as the other financial services firms. And so, as I say, regulatory compliance, AML, risk management is significantly important to us as well. So in order to operate here and remain compliant, there are significant roles within firms like ours as well. Some of it, to a certain extent, is kind of new to those that are joining the team, because the subject matter, the business, the industry that we're in is new to everyone. So there is an element of adjustment, if you want to, in terms of just getting to understand the areas that we operate. But it's not a million miles away at the same time from other financial services firms, simply based on the fact, as I said earlier on, that we are regulated and we do adhere to a number of existing regulations, as well as I say, what potentially might come down the road later on. So I think that's probably giving people a sense, hopefully, for the fact that, as I said, even crypto firms, if I dare say it, fintech firms like ours that are emerging in brand new industries, still have compliance obligations, and therefore, There are opportunities in this area. There's certainly, if people want to branch out and do something a little bit different from a risk and compliance perspective, if you're thinking in terms of regulatory compliance or indeed AML, as we're talking about today, there are opportunities within these firms. And, that potentially you have an opportunity, overuse of the word maybe, but you have an opportunity to blaze a bit of a trail, be one of the first, be a pioneer potentially in this industry, and who knows what doors that might open up for you later on. Our CEO said recently in an interview, which I thought was great, is because the industry is moving so fast, and regulation as well. As the product develops, regulations are beginning to emerge and be drafted globally. He talked about, from a product and regulation perspective, working in this industry is a little bit like trying to drink water through a fire hose. It really is fast moving. It is fast paced. There's a lot going on at the same time. But super interesting, and also in terms of what's going on and how what the future looks like. So I suppose that's the background, if I want, Andrew, in terms of the regulatory environment.
No, that was great, Cormac. Thank you. No, and again, just to pick up on what you were sort of touching on there towards the close, it is about an opportunity to transition, and I think there is a real opportunity for not just existing, but maybe people who are thinking about careers in risk and compliance to sort of move into these newer, developing areas. So payments itself is such an evolving area. Crypto's kind of part of it, but crypto's going to emerge, I think, more as part of the financial services infrastructure. There's retail. There's obviously a more kind of Wall Street aspect to it as well. But I think one of the things, we might just touch on the class that you were in, the certificate you just finished, was Cormac. That was actually one of the themes that was really interesting, that when you talk about fintech, people have a very kind of strange idea what they're looking for. And I think one of the themes that came out of the class, which was full of industry professionals of varying degrees of seniority and background, was financial services. It's still about that regulatory kind of framework. And the products might be innovative, the technology might be really innovative, but you still have to have that core compliance function. So I don't know if you touch on that. That was a very interesting theme that ran right through that class.
Absolutely. I mean, I found that class hugely relevant, yet it wasn't specific to crypto or virtual assets companies, but everything within that course to me was hugely relevant. And I suppose the way I'd put it is, it's also very different, but at the same time, it's also very familiar and the same as when it comes to the regulatory obligations and the compliance side of things, if you want to call it that. So again, as I said, some of the very more established regulations are still things that we have to be aware of and understand and comply with. So, I mean, the course itself, I found, really beneficial. I might just say this in terms of, it covered all those key topics. So each of those regulations talked about were covered, but also the risk side of things, I thought was excellent in terms of the perspective that it gave. I suppose it positions itself as a really good course for fintech people wanting to learn more about the regulatory environment, and that's probably where I was coming from. So I probably signed up for this course saying, right, I've taken up this new role. I want to learn a little bit more about fintech risk and compliance. This sounds exactly what I would like to approach it from. But we also had a number of people in the class who were professionals from a compliance background who wanted to learn more about fintech, and I think it really delivered on both, to be honest. So, I think, it catered for both audiences, if I want. Part of it was the syllabus, and those that ran it, yourself and Larry and the faculty, I suppose, as well, really made that work. But you talked about how the course is based on, sort of workshops and breakout rooms, that sort of thing, and also the fact that we bring in industry experts as well. I think that brought everything together a little bit as well, because there was an awful lot of debate and conversation often some nights, which I thought was great. That was really engaging and a great way to learn. So.
And it is about creating a learning environment. Just to be clear for everyone, Cormac finished the certificate in FinTech Risk and Compliance. We have a diploma version, if you like, a bigger version of that, starting also in September. And obviously today we were talking about the diploma in anti-money laundering in the FinTech environment, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it is what it is. I don't know if Jennifer's still there. Jennifer, are you still there? I'm just wondering if Jennifer's still there, I might just try and wrap this up. I don't know, any kind of final thoughts, Jennifer, in terms of what Cormac was talking about, the opportunities. I mean, you mentioned transition, you mentioned upskilling, you know, you mentioned networking. You know, I think people exploring maybe the boundaries of what's possible for them in terms of their career paths.
Yeah, no, I think, look, between exactly what Cormac, and obviously you've got somebody in the industry who's sort of given a practical example of what he got from a course, you know, and I think it is that advantage of, you know, compliance and risk maybe becoming more mainstream, or at least people even in operations roles within these businesses needing to have more than just a cursory, very high level understanding of what the regulatory requirements are and what that environment really is. So I think that's, you know, I would totally agree with Cormac on that side, that, you know, the bleed is happening, you know what I mean? It's not like, okay, that's your box, you're looking after compliance and risk, and I'm in operations and I don't need to kind of bother with that, or to, you know, to run a successful business, and particularly in the startup phase, you've got to have that cross contamination where everybody's invested, and, you know, you've everybody involved in every aspect of the business, and you've kind of got as many eyes as possible on things, because it comes back to what the CBI are looking for as well in terms of diversity, a diversity of thought and background, you know, and trying to bring new blood into compliance and risk, and not just have the stale group that got into it 10 years ago and then they're the only people that can ever go into compliance and risk jobs. And we're certainly seeing that pushback in terms of PCF authorizations, that I think what maybe the industry thought were the poster people for compliance and risk jobs are not necessarily what the central bank are looking for. So it's not necessarily having X number of years under your belt, but, you know, comes back to what I was saying about just that enthusiasm and research, and people who genuinely are motivated and can either show, like Cormac said, a pre-existing industry knowledge coming from maybe a different background from an operations or non-risk and compliance background, but really wanting to maybe get more into that. And a course like this being your sort of first stepping stone. It's difficult in Ireland, I will say, in terms of making you know, a change from an operations role into a compliance role, but certainly courses like this are stepping stones towards doing that. And I think you do have to undertake courses like this just to educate yourself and to know what it is that you're looking to get into.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's. I'll just go back to Cormac and then I'll close it off. But obviously, that's very much the objective. And as I alluded to, the course was absolutely written with the benefit of a lot of industry professional expert opinion as to what we're trying to address here. But it is, Cormac, I'll just finish up with you. It is obviously trying to create a talent pool that we need, because, you know, obviously, you know, for crypto to become, you know, a sort of center of excellence in Ireland, for payments to have this real ecosystem in Ireland, you know, for Ireland to obviously have this reputation as a place of compliance, but also innovation, it ultimately, and I often say this, and I know you and I talked about this recently, Cormac, I don't think the technology is the issue, it's the people. We need the people. And obviously we need to create and nurture that talent. So I might just finish up with you, Cormac.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, you know, I think a number of factors have happened recently which have probably put greater demands on the risk and compliance talent pool within Ireland, which means there's greater demand, there's greater opportunity for people at the same time. But between Brexit, I think, and recent regulations that have emerged, it just meant we need a greater number of experts, if I want to call it like that, and with a greater level of expertise. And everyone is probably drawing on that existing pool that Jennifer referred to earlier on. So absolutely, this particular area really does potentially need new blood coming through. And we've heard that from all sorts of areas. So we've heard that from industry leaders, and we've heard it from the CBI as well, that there is potentially, I suppose, a bottleneck now that we need to probably break through in terms of the existing talent pool that's there today. And I think, as you said, the issue isn't necessarily the technology, the issue isn't the fintech side of things, because, you know, we have phenomenal people from a technology perspective here who are really driving the business, there's no doubt about it. But on the regulatory side of things, we probably need to start, as we said, bringing the new blood through, creating the opportunities for people potentially to start careers here if they're having a think about it, or transition, you know, from one part of the business to another. And I will say, you know, that there may have been a potential perception, and Jennifer, I think you alluded to this earlier on, that specifically on the risk, on the compliance and on the AML side of things, that maybe roles weren't necessarily of high priority within an organization than others. But I mean, right now, I think they probably couldn't be higher. I think the priority, the focus around these areas, the opportunity for people, and I suppose the opportunity for development within those roles, and God knows where that will lead then afterwards, as I say. Exactly. I think it has never been better. So you know, while we talk about, you know, the demands on the role, at the same time, it's a great opportunity for people to get into space.
Yeah, no.
Andrew, could I just add, and I think Cormac, you alluded to it when you were talking about that entrepreneurial spirit. I think that's the one thing that we do come up against, and I get that culturally it's difficult if you've been in a very traditional, say for example, a domestic bank for a number of years, to go into a fintech. Not only the terms of pace, but it can be loose at the beginning. You know what I mean? They might go, "Where's my job description?" You're like, "You don't have one. You sit here and you do lots of different things every day." And yes, technically that's your role. So there is a lot about just your attitude as an individual, and having, as an employee, entrepreneurial flair is as important, particularly in a startup environment. And it would be the one thing that I would say to people when they're coming in going, "Oh, well, where's the benefit structures and where's all this and all that?" And you're like, "That's not established yet. It's not going to be established for, you know." So you either, particularly in a startup environment, you have to know that opportunity comes with some compromises at the beginning, and it comes with quite a bit of grey and maybe not as prescribed personally. But I suppose I am an entrepreneur. I think anything that's not too prescribed, that's where opportunity is. If you don't hang on to a job description for dear life thinking, "Oh God, okay, here's the 10 things," have a conversation with the co-founder or somebody like Cormac who's running the business in Ireland, and see if you gel, see if there's spark there, see if that's somebody I would like to work with, and I get good kind of energy from that, and I think we could work really, really well and do great things. And that's the one thing I would say to anybody listening going, you have to take that hat of where's all that formality that comes with a traditional employer, and embrace the fact that there is going to be less of it. But the upside to that is that's where there's opportunity. That's where the potential is.
That's exactly right. I think I'll finish off, it's okay, because I did say I'd try and keep it to 45, 50 minutes because we could talk all day as we might anyway. But I think there's this nexus, as Cormac and yourself have alluded to. You know, we're in a period, I think, of almost ongoing regulatory change, and we're in a period of almost ongoing technological innovation, whatever you want to call it. We're seeing really interesting, crypto is a good example, product innovation. And I think that just creates such a really exciting opportunity. And I think what Jennifer and yourself alluded to, and I'll finish with this comment, I do think it's having that open mind, that attitude, embrace the change, and you know what, it could lead you to some really good places, I think. But listen, thank you, Cormac, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for everyone who stayed with us. Thank you, ACOI. Michael, if you're okay, I think I might close it down now, if that's okay. Thank you, Michael. Is that okay? I'll wait for you to confirm we've stopped, Michael. We've stopped, have we?
Yeah, all good, Andrew, thanks.
Great, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Cormac. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah,
I'll catch you tomorrow, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And Cormac, I'll catch up with you soon.